20 years, trillions of dollars, and Afghanistan fell to the Taliban in less than 10 days. The human cost of this collapse is unfolding rapidly before our eyes and will continue for years to come. And for the majority of Afghans who can never escape, theirs will be a future lost, living under the brutality of the Taliban regime. And yet, US President Joe Biden remains resolute that leaving Afghanistan was the right decision because no amount of military support will bring a united and safe Afghanistan. As tough as it is to ask, has America got this right, or has it betrayed the people it came to help? And what damage will the fall of Afghanistan do for America's credibility on the world stage? Let me bring in my guest, Dr. Jonathan Schroden, the director at the Countering Threats and Challenges program at the US-based CNA Corporation. He's one of the foremost experts on Afghanistan and someone who deeply cares about what's going on there right now. John, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. So a 20-year mission ending in absolute chaos and utter misery. Was there really no other way?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me, Mariam. It's great to join you again. So there's always another way, right? I mean, history can take many different paths. There are always other decisions that could have been made that might have led to other outcomes. That said, I would rewind the clock back to the discussion and debate that took place about whether or not the U.S. should stay in Afghanistan or whether it should leave. And at the time, earlier this year, even late last year, it looked like President Biden might choose to leave. I mean, based on his past, comments and arguments when he was the vice president in the Obama administration, right? It was clear that he had strong leanings towards getting the U.S. out of Afghanistan. But in another sense, it didn't necessarily have to be as chaotic as what we're seeing now, right? I mean, the way in which the U.S. withdrew was so quick, and the pulling out of capabilities, especially our air support to the Afghan security forces, happened so rapidly that it didn't really allow time for adjustments to be made on the ground to the sudden withdrawal of all of that capability and all of that support. And so while a slower withdrawal might have engendered greater blowback from the Taliban in terms of the U.S. Taliban agreement and the timelines that it contained, et cetera, and certainly this is me speaking in hindsight, although at the time I argued, that a longer, perhaps a 6-month extension of that timeline would have been a good thing to seek.
So why do you think Joe Biden stuck so steadfastly to this peace agreement that was brokered by an administration that he has criticized?
There was bipartisan support to end the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. So that's the first reason. The second is there was broad popular support in the U.S. among the American public to get out of Afghanistan. While the vast majority of Americans really had no idea what was happening in Afghanistan anymore, had stopped paying attention to that many, many years ago, those who did believed that it was time for the U.S. to get out. The majority of respondents said that. So President Biden sensed this popular mandate to leave Afghanistan as well.
The popular support that you talk of from within America, everything you're hearing from within the country, is it still in favor of this withdrawal despite everything that's going on?
I mean, I think Americans, generally speaking, right, those sort of average Americans that I've talked to about it, see what's happening now and think it's a real shame. It's an embarrassment, right? I mean, these are sort of emotions and terms that you hear. But at the same time, if you put the choice to them, well, would you rather we stayed militarily in Afghanistan, before, or even, we could keep a military presence there now, I suppose, and try to deal with this. If you ask them, would you have liked the military to stay in Afghanistan? The answer is generally no.
The view from inside America is so stark to the rest of the world. For the rest of the world, they are very much, you could say the ire of the world is focused on Joe Biden. You could say the intractable US president. But just how much of this is actually the result, not of anything of not to do with any decision that he has made in the limited time that he has been in office, but it actually has to do with 20 years of perhaps miscalculations or foreign policy missteps when it comes to Afghanistan.
President Biden will take a lot of heat, is taking a lot of heat, and may take heat historically when the record is written and analyzed for having made this final decision to get out. But the results of that decision, what we're seeing in Afghanistan now, are really the avalanche of, as you said, up to 20 years worth of poor decisions that were made by a wide coterie of people that spanned administrations of both political parties in the United States. And what you're seeing right now, popularly, right, the fingers of blame are out, and there's lots of blame this person, blame that person, blame this organization, blame that organization, and the answer that I've come to is there's plenty of blame to go around. And I really, I take issue with anyone who points the finger of blame too far beyond themselves, especially if they were at one time a U.S. government official.
What could they have done better? Is there, I know it's a big ask, but is there anything that you can pinpoint and say America could have done this and the outcome right now wouldn't be what's happening?
There's a cliched saying at this point that the U.S. fought this war not as a 20-year war, but a series of 21-year wars. And what I find interesting about that saying is not so much that it's a cliche, but that it's a cliche that has existed for over a decade. 10 years ago, people were saying the U.S. has fought this not as a 10-year war, but as a series of 10 one-year wars. And every year they would just add another year to this cliche. And it's really emblematic of the entire experience of the international community post-2001 in Afghanistan, which is we never had a coherent strategy or a coherent set of political end states that we were trying to accomplish there.
So in hindsight, then, this collapse was inevitable. The collapse of both the Afghan government and the Afghan security forces.
A friend of mine described it a different way, which I think is more apt. Which is to say the outcome was overdetermined, right? There were so many poor decisions made along the way. There was incoherency of the mission for so long, and the Afghan government, has just become increasingly corrupt, increasingly predatory, increasingly incompetent over time. That the outcome here was overdetermined. It may not have been inevitable. Different decisions could have been made along the way. But by the time President Biden decided to withdraw, the outcome of a weak Afghanistan government being unable to sort of stand up for itself was probably overdetermined.
In some way, it was perhaps wrong of the previous U.S. administration to let the wolf back into the pen. Obviously, the Taliban were controlling large parts of Afghanistan, rural parts of Afghanistan, especially by 2018. But was it wrong, perhaps, to give them a seat at the table? Or I hate to always use this word inevitable when it comes to the Taliban, but was it just that they were inevitable and you had to at least try to control them in some kind of way?
The Taliban are part and parcel of contemporaneous Afghanistan. They are not some people would have you believe that they're a completely foreign movement that was created by Pakistan and imposed on Afghanistan. But and there are elements of truth to the Pakistani support part of that, but it ignores the fact that the vast majority of Afghan Taliban are recruited locally. So I think what the U.S. was trying to do is to recognize that the Taliban are not going away, that they need to be accommodated somehow, and the peace process in Doha was ultimately an attempt to try and reach some type of accommodation. That process ultimately failed, obviously. But I think that was the intent, was to sort of recognize they're not going away. They need to be accommodated somehow. And let's see if we can come to some arrangement that does that.
Who fills that vacuum that the U.S. has left?
I think what you're going to see is a multinational, set of actors that become much more important now. So China, Russia, even this Pakistan, certainly Iran, the Central Asian states, perhaps to a lesser extent. But all of these countries, the EU, all of these countries are going to have stakes in the future of Afghanistan. And with the U.S. becoming a much diminished actor now by not having a military presence there very soon, is going to open the space for a lot of these other actors to have more influence. And so what will be really interesting to watch going forward is to what extent do all of these different countries pursue their own interests with the Taliban bilaterally versus coming together and sort of, forming a collective front to present their collective demands and interests to the Taliban and to try and shape them that way. And this is, I think, where the U.S. has a sort of moral obligation and, frankly, some real strong national interest going forward.
All right. And so, John, just lastly, what is going to be the legacy of America's longest ever war? Abject failure?
Well, it's a loss. I don't know how you could categorize it at this point as anything other than that. With the Taliban coming to power so quickly and convincingly, and with President Ghani fleeing the country, et cetera, I mean, it's you cannot categorize it as anything other than a total loss. And so I think it'll be remembered and framed as such, and that's a really hard thing for an American to say. It's a really hard thing for the American government to accept, to swallow. And so I think there's going to be, a real period in the U.S. of sort of soul searching about this. And I hope that there is. I mean, I hope that we don't do what we did in the wake of Vietnam, which is to say, that was a really painful experience. Let's put it immediately in the rearview mirror and try to never talk about it again. And I hope instead that we do go through a period of sort of agonizing soul searching, and trying to learn from this experience. I think that's really, really important, both for the individuals who are involved, right? People who are struggling to understand, is anything that they did with respect to Afghanistan, their service, friends they saw killed, et cetera, is any of that meaningful? I think it's important for people to, come to some sort of personal reflection on that. But it's also important institutionally for the U.S. government to engage in some real serious, retrospective, introspection here to try and learn and improve going forward. Okay,
well, John, on that, always a pleasure. We'll have to leave it there, of course. But you can, of course, follow John on Twitter at JJ Schroden. And to everyone who is, of course, watching more episodes that will chart the fall of Afghanistan, what has gone wrong and where it goes to next are coming up on the Making News podcast. I'm Mariam. Zaidi. Take care and bye-bye.